Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of people who watch these videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy this kind of content, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel more than you think. Please leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Your interaction helps these stories reach more people. Thank you for being here. I'm a backcountry ranger with just over 11 years in federal service. Most of that time I've worked patrol and search and rescue in remote forest units where help is measured in hours, not minutes. I've pulled bodies out of ravines, coordinated night evacuations in whiteout conditions, and spent entire winters alone in fire lookouts with nothing but a radio and the wind. I'm not easily rattled, and I don't believe in folklore. If something happens in the woods, there's usually a reason you can write down in a report. This happened during a winter assignment I took 3 years ago, when I accepted temporary night duty at a remote interagency facility buried deep in pine forest, about 40 miles from the nearest town. On paper, it was classified as a wildlife research and medical intake annex. In practice, it was an old fortified complex from the early 20th century that had been repurposed too many times and never fully decommissioned. The job wasn't glamorous. It was overnight patrol, access control, and basic monitoring. But the hazard pay and night differential were unusually high. I took it because my mother had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer earlier that year, and even with insurance, the bills were coming faster than I could keep up. When the site manager quoted the hourly rate over the phone, I asked her to repeat it. She did, without emotion, and added that most people didn't last more than a few weeks on night rotation. I told her I could start that Friday. The facility sits at the end of a single 2-lane road that winds through dense forest for miles. No cell service past the first 10 minutes. No nearby residences. The trees around the perimeter lean at odd angles, not from wind, but as if the soil itself never quite settled. The building is all stone and narrow windows, designed in an era when institutions were meant to look permanent and inescapable. During my first drive up the gravel access road, I remember thinking it looked less like a research site and more like something built to keep things contained. Inside, everything echoed. High ceilings, polished floors worn down into shallow grooves by decades of boots and gurneys. Fluorescent lights hummed constantly, especially in the east wing, where the sound never quite faded into the background. The air smelled like disinfectant, old paper, and something faintly organic, the way basements smell when they've been sealed too long. The site manager met me in the main corridor just before my first shift started. Civilian supervisor, late 60s. Hair pulled back so tight it made her expression permanently severe. She handed me a laminated badge, a heavy key card on a lanyard, and a laminated sheet of paper. "This is your access," she said, tapping the badge. "Perimeter doors, patrol corridors, utilities, and approved storage areas. You also have sublevel access if you run out of supplies during your shift." Then she nodded at the laminated sheet. "These are the night protocols specific to this site. Standard stuff, mostly. Keep noise down. Don't engage subjects unless necessary. Follow your route. Any questions?" I glanced at the sheet. 7 numbered rules in all caps, printed in a font that looked decades out of date. I didn't read them closely. I'd worked enough remote assignments to know that most night protocols were common sense and liability language. "No questions," I said. She studied me for a moment like she was deciding whether to say something else. Then she shook her head. "Your duty officer tonight is Kay Duchesne. She's on site. Radio her if you need anything. Otherwise, keep your head down. Quiet and invisible. That's what we need from night staff." She walked away without another word, her footsteps echoing until a door closed somewhere, and the building settled back into silence. I folded the laminated rules and slid them into my cargo pocket without reading them. The work itself was routine. I ran perimeter checks, verified door seals, logged temperatures, and walked the same corridors every 90 minutes. The radio stayed quiet. Occasionally I heard movement behind secured doors or the distant hum of machinery cycling on and off, but nothing out of the ordinary for a place that never truly slept. The facility at night felt less abandoned and more like it was holding its breath. I saw Duchesne twice that first week. She was a tall woman in her 50s, wearing standard-issue duty gear instead of civilian clothes, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime in controlled environments. The first time she passed me, she nodded. The second time, she stopped. "You're the new night ranger," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Mom. You settling in? Doing fine." "Doing fine." Her eyes flicked to the lanyard on my chest, then to my cargo pocket. "You read your protocols?" I hesitated just long enough to notice it myself. Dochane's jaw tightened. "Read them," she said. "Tonight, all of them. They're not suggestions." She walked away before I could answer. I meant to read them. I really did. But the nights blurred together. 10-hour shifts starting at 11 p.m., ending after dawn. My body ran on muscle memory, while my mind stayed on hospital bills, treatment schedules, and the way my mother's voice had grown thinner over the phone. The laminated sheet stayed in my pocket, then my bag, and eventually I stopped thinking about it at all. 3 weeks in, I ran out of disinfectant. It was 2:47 a.m. Middle of a Thursday shift, and I just finished a routine sanitation check near the East Wing utility corridor when I realized the last container was empty. The approved supply room was locked. Someone on day shift had forgotten to stage extra for nights. I radioed Duchesne, but got no response. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes she was dealing with internal issues that didn't get logged over open channels. I stood there weighing my options. I could wait. I could skip the check and risk a write-up, or I could use my badge to access the sub-level storage area the site manager had mentioned on my first night. The keycard felt heavier than usual against my chest. I took the stairwell down. The temperature dropped with every level. By the time I reached the sub-level landing, I could see my breath. The air tasted stale and slightly sweet, like preserved materials kept too long. A single bare bulb lit the concrete corridor, casting sharp shadows that moved when I did. According to the faded signage, storage was straight ahead. As I walked, my footsteps echoed louder than they should have, the sound bouncing back at me a fraction of a second too late. That's when I noticed the door. At the very end of the corridor, past the storage entrance, there was a reinforced metal door that didn't match anything else in the building. Modern, industrial. Keypad lock. Small observation window at eye level. The kind of door you don't install unless you're expecting pressure from the other side. I should have turned around. Instead, I walked toward it. The cold intensified. My breath came out in thick clouds. When I reached the window, I leaned in and looked through. The room beyond wasn't completely dark. A faint blue emergency light illuminated just enough for me to make out a cot, a chair, and a human figure sitting perfectly still. A woman. Impossibly old. Skin thin as paper, white hair hanging loose, hands folded neatly in her lap. She stared at nothing. Then her head turned. Slowly, precisely, like a machine finding its mark. Her eyes fixed on mine, and something about them made my stomach drop. Not disease, not madness, awareness, too much of it. Like she wasn't looking at my face so much as through it. Her lips moved. I didn't hear her voice through the glass. I heard it inside my head. "Hello," she said. "You should read your rules." I stumbled backward, slamming into the opposite wall hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. My heart was pounding. The bulb overhead flickered. When I looked back at the door, condensation had formed on the window and written backward in the fog, so I could read it from where I stood, were 4 words slowly dripping down the glass. "Read your rules." I ran. I don't remember climbing the stairs. I don't remember the corridors. The next clear moment I have is standing under bright fluorescent lights, hands shaking, breath ragged, trying to convince myself that what I'd just experienced had a rational explanation. The laminated sheet was still in my bag. I pulled it out and read it for the first time, and I realized I had already broken more rules than I could count. I read the rules standing there in the 3rd-floor corridor, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, my hands still shaking. They weren't long. 7 lines, no explanations, no context, just directives. Never enter the sublevel after 10:00 p.m. if any subject addresses you by name without prior introduction. Disengage immediately and report. Do not maintain eye contact with any subject for longer than 3 seconds. If you hear crying in an unoccupied room, do not investigate. Continue patrol. All secured doors must remain in their current state. If you find one altered, leave it and notify the duty officer. If a subject states that they can see or feel you, end the interaction immediately. Do not ask follow-up questions. Never discuss Subject 01 with anyone outside this facility. I read them twice, then a 3rd time. Rules 1, 2, and 3 had already been broken. I didn't need to think about it. I knew. I'd gone below after hours. I'd been addressed directly. I'd held eye contact far longer than 3 seconds. The building around me sounded the same as it always had. The distant hum of ventilation, the soft mechanical cycling of systems, but it felt thinner now, like the noise was a surface stretched tight over something deeper. I finished the shift in a fog. I logged nothing unusual. I didn't radio Duchesne. When dawn came and I drove home through the trees, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights that weren't there. I called in sick the next night. It felt like cowardice, but I couldn't make myself drive back. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that pressure behind them again, like a thumb resting just inside my skull. Not pain, presence. Hello. The word never came through my ears. It arrived whole, formed, intimate. I spent that night in my apartment with every light on, the laminated rules sheet spread on my kitchen table. I told myself exhaustion could do strange things. Stress, long hours, old buildings. None of it held. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You will come back. You always do. I stared at the screen until it went dark. The next evening, I went back. My mother's next round of treatment was scheduled for Friday. I needed the paycheck. Fear doesn't pay bills, and it doesn't stop cancer. So I drove the same road through the forest, parked in the same empty lot, and walked through the same doors. Everything felt wrong immediately. Not dramatically, subtly. The lights were a little harsher. The shadows didn't quite line up with the fixtures. Sounds carried farther than they should have. I kept the rule sheet in my front pocket this time, the laminated edge sharp against my palm whenever I checked that it was still there. I started my patrol on the 3rd floor and stayed far away from the sublevel access points. I rationed supplies. I skipped non-critical tasks, anything to avoid going downstairs again. For the first few hours, nothing happened. Then I encountered Rule 3. I was emptying a trash receptacle near the nurse's station when one of the long-term residents stepped into the corridor. Elderly. Female. Harmless on paper. I'd passed her dozens of times before without incident. She usually shuffled along with a blank smile, medicated into pleasant neutrality. This time, she stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell the institutional soap on her clothes. She looked straight at me. I counted in my head. 1, 2. I broke eye contact and looked down at the trash bag. You smell different, she said. Her voice was calm, too calm, like she was reading a weather report. I said nothing. I focused on tying the bag. You smell like the one downstairs, she continued. She can smell you too. Rule 6 flashed through my mind. If a subject states that they can see or feel you, disengage immediately. I left the trash bag where it was and walked away. I didn't run. Running would have drawn attention. I kept my pace steady, professional. Just another night ranger moving on to the next task. Behind me, she laughed. It was dry and papery, the sound leaves make when they scrape across concrete. It followed me down the corridor longer than footsteps should. I should have reported it. I didn't, because some part of me didn't want confirmation, didn't want Duchesne to say it out loud, didn't want to hear that this was real. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard voices coming from the common room. That space was supposed to be empty at night, lights out, doors secured, but the sound carried through the corridor. A low, rhythmic murmur, like several people speaking at once but perfectly synchronized. I stopped before the door. Rule 4 echoed in my head. If you hear crying in an unoccupied room, do not investigate. This wasn't crying. I looked through the observation window. 6 people sat in a semicircle facing the door. Men and women, middle-aged to elderly. Hands folded neatly in their laps. Perfect posture. Still, their eyes lifted together. They were all looking directly at me. Hello, they said. One voice, 6 mouths. I broke eye contact instantly and stepped back. Rule 2. If any subject addresses you by name, hello, they repeated, slightly louder. I turned and walked fast toward the stairwell, my radio already in my hand. Behind me, the door opened. She says you have kind eyes, the chorus called. She says you remind her of someone from before. I took the stairs 2 at a time. My hands were shaking as I keyed the radio. Duchesne, I said. I need you on the 3rd floor, common room, now. Her response came immediately. Calm. Controlled. Stay where you are. Don't return to that wing. I stopped on the landing and forced myself to breathe. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I can see through them more easily. Their walls are thin. Yours are stronger. That's why she likes you. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Duchesne arrived 20 minutes later. She found me sitting on the stairwell back against the wall, staring at nothing. They've been sedated, she said after a long silence. They won't remember anything by morning. What is this place? I asked. She looked at me for a long time. You went downstairs, she said. Not a question. I nodded. You looked at her. Another nod. You're compromised, Duchesne said quietly. That's why the rules exist. She didn't explain further. She didn't have to. The building seemed to listen as she spoke, every sound tightening around us. 2 choices, she continued. You quit and hope the connection fades. Or you stay, follow the rules exactly, and we try to manage it. And if I quit, her expression darkened. That hasn't worked for everyone. I thought of the text message, the voice in my head, the way the eyes in the common room had moved as one. I'll stay, I said. Duchesne nodded once. Then read the rules every night, and never go below again. I finished the rest of that shift on autopilot, avoiding entire sections of the building, documenting nothing out of the ordinary. When dawn came, I felt watched all the way to my car. As I drove home, my phone buzzed one last time. Thank you for staying. I didn't reply, but I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach sink, that whatever I'd seen in that sublevel room hadn't let go of me, and it wasn't done. I learned quickly that the most dangerous nights weren't the ones where something obvious happened. They were the quiet ones. After that conversation in the stairwell, Duchesne changed my rotation. I was still on nights, but my patrol area narrowed. Certain corridors were no longer on my route. Certain doors were no longer mentioned. Nothing was put in writing. She didn't have to. In places like that, instructions didn't always come from paper. For the first week after the incident, nothing happened. No voices, no messages, no pressure behind my eyes. If I hadn't known better, I might have convinced myself it was over, that the rules worked as long as you followed them precisely. But the facility itself started to drift. It began with the logbook. Every ranger on night duty maintained a handwritten patrol log. Times, locations, door statuses, radio checks, redundant by design. Digital logs could be altered. Paper was supposed to be final. On my 4th shift after the stairwell incident, I noticed an entry I didn't remember writing. 212, East Wing corridor clear. No movement. The handwriting was mine. Same slant, same pressure, same way I crossed my 7s. The problem was that I hadn't been in the East Wing at 212. I knew that because I'd deliberately avoided it. I'd been in the mechanical hall on the opposite side of the building, logged and confirmed by a radio check with dispatch. I flipped back through previous pages. There were 2 more entries like that. Minor, easy to miss. Times where the log placed me somewhere I knew I hadn't been. I brought it to Duchesne at shift change. She didn't look surprised. Do not correct it, she said. Do not initial changes. Do not mention it to anyone else. That's falsifying records, I said. She met my eyes. No. That's damage control. That was the first time she used those words. The radio started acting up a few nights later. At first it was just interference. Bursts of static that didn't correspond to weather or terrain. Then it began dropping syllables, cutting words in half. Then it started using the wrong call signs. I'd check in as normal. Night patrol, checkpoint 3. The response would come back clean, calm, unmistakably human. Copy that, Tyler. I stopped using my name on the radio after that. So did everyone else. Duchesne told me not to acknowledge it. If it's not procedural, she said, it doesn't exist. But procedure was unraveling. Security cameras began flagging motion where nothing was present. Hallways empty on visual, but marked as occupied by sensors. Doors logged as unopened that were clearly ajar. Not wide. Just enough to notice if you were looking. Rule 5. All secure doors must remain in their current state. One night I found a door on my route that had been closed during my previous pass, now standing open by less than an inch. I didn't touch it. I radioed Duchesne. Her reply came instantly. Leave it. Log the time. Do not return to that corridor. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the narrow strip of darkness beyond the door. Something inside shifted, not curiosity, recognition. The pressure behind my eyes returned that night. Faint, but familiar, like someone leaning close without touching. I started dreaming of the sublevel again. Not the room, not the door, the hallway. Endless. Concrete. Cold. Always leading forward. Always stopping just before the door came into view. I woke up every time with the same thought already in my head. You're learning. I didn't tell Duchesne about the dreams. Instead, she told me something she hadn't said before. It happened during a rare overlap shift when we both had reason to be on site before dawn. We were standing near the loading bay, drinking bad coffee, listening to the building settle. There was another one like you, she said without looking at me. I didn't ask who. Night staff, years ago. Same mistake. Same rules broken in the same order. What happened to him? She hesitated. He quit. Did everything right after that. Stayed away. Followed instructions. And he came back 3 weeks later, she said. Didn't remember driving here. Didn't remember asking to be let in. Just stood at the perimeter gate and waited. My throat tightened. Where is he now? Duchesne finally looked at me. Second floor. Long term. Doesn't speak. Doesn't sleep. Sometimes he stares at the walls like he's watching traffic. I understood then why she never raised her voice. Why she never rushed. Why she treated every anomaly like a contained spill instead of a crisis. This wasn't new. It was managed. That realization didn't make me feel safer. It made me feel replaceable. The next escalation came quietly. I started losing time. Not hours, minutes. I'd glance at my watch, round a corner, then check again and realize 10 minutes had passed with no memory of the corridor between. No panic, no confusion, just blank continuity. The logs filled in those gaps for me. Always accurate. Always procedural. As if something was making sure the story stayed consistent. The messages came back after that. Never directly threatening. Never demanding. Observations. You're tired tonight. You skipped a step. You're doing better. Once, while I was standing alone in the central corridor, lights dimmed for scheduled energy cycling. I felt the sensation of someone standing just behind me. I didn't turn around. Rule 3. I stared straight ahead and counted my breaths until the lights returned. The sensation lingered. Satisfied. The worst part wasn't fear anymore. The building no longer felt hostile. It felt attentive. Responsive. Like it had learned my patterns and adjusted around them. And somewhere below, behind a door I no longer approached, something was using me as a reference point. I didn't know what the incident would be yet. I only knew it was coming, because the rules stopped being enough. And when procedure fails, the only thing left is containment. The shift that changed everything started like the others. Cold, quiet, logged. I checked in with dispatch at 23-0, confirmed perimeter integrity, and began my first patrol loop. Nothing unusual. No miscalls, no phantom entries, no pressure behind the eyes. That should have worried me more than it did. At 1:34, the radio crackled. Not static. Not interference. Breathing. Slow, controlled. Close to the mic, I waited. Dispatch, I said carefully. Night patrol checking in. Do you copy? A pause. Then in Duchesne's voice, but flatter, stripped of cadence. Continue your route. That was not protocol. Dispatch never issued direct route instructions unless there was an active incident. I keyed the radio again, ready to challenge when her real voice cut in over the same channel, overlapping the first by half a second. Negative, Duchesne said sharply. Hold position. Do not move. The channel went dead. I stood there in the corridor, radio still raised, listening to the echo of two identical voices collapsing into silence. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. It wasn't mimicking people. It was learning authority. The logbook reacted before I did. I hadn't written anything yet, but when I flipped it open, a new line was already there. 136. Patrol paused per instruction. No initials. No handwriting variation. Perfect. I closed the book and didn't touch it again for the rest of the night. At 2:05, the first alarm triggered. Not a fire alarm. Not security. A medical alert from the East Wing. One of the long-term residents, bedridden, nonverbal, showed a sudden spike in vitals followed by a complete flatline. Procedure demanded response. Rules demanded stents. I radioed Duchesne. No answer. I radioed again, switching channels. Still nothing. The facility map on my tablet flickered. The East Wing corridor highlighted itself, pulsing faintly, like a suggestion rather than a directive. I didn't move. I stood exactly where I was and waited. That was the right decision, because 5 minutes later, the alert cleared on its own. Vitals normalized. No intervention logged. No explanation provided. A second line appeared in the logbook without my involvement. 2:11. Incident resolved. Resolved by whom was not specified. The pressure behind my eyes returned after that. Stronger than it had ever been. Not painful. Intimate. As if something had leaned closer because I'd behaved correctly. Good restraint. I felt the words, not heard them. At 2:40, Duchesne finally reached me. "Do not go to East Wing," she said. Her voice was tight now. Controlled but strained. "No matter what you hear. No matter what you see." "What's happening?" I asked. A long pause. Then quietly, containment has shifted. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to, because at 3:02 the crying started. It came from an unoccupied room. Soft, rhythmic, almost polite. Rule 4. I stayed where I was. The crying continued for 11 minutes, then stopped abruptly. When it ended, the lights dimmed across the entire facility at once. Not scheduled, not staggered. Just a uniform drop, like a held breath. In the silence that followed, I felt it again. Presence. Not behind me. Around me. As if the building itself had become the observation window. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Unknown number. "You're doing well tonight." "You're not like the others." I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because the next message arrived immediately. "We need to talk." I backed up slowly until my shoulders touched the wall. I kept my eyes forward. I didn't acknowledge anything that wasn't strictly procedural. The radio clicked on by itself, not a channel opening, not a call. Just the sound of a room tone. Empty, enclosed, underground. Then a voice I hadn't heard aloud since the sublevel. "You're very careful now," it said. Calm, observant, not unkind. "That makes you useful." I closed my eyes. That was my second mistake. The moment I did, the pressure surged. Not invasion, alignment. Like two radio frequencies snapping into phase. I saw the hallway. Not as I remembered it, as it was now. The reinforced door was no longer closed. It was open, and whatever had been contained by that door was no longer entirely below. I opened my eyes, and the vision snapped away, leaving me shaking against the wall. Breath ragged, heart pounding. The radio went silent. My phone buzzed one last time. "Don't worry, you're still on the safe side." For now. Dawn came late that morning. When Duchesne met me at shift change, she looked older than I'd ever seen her. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't mention the alarms. She only said this: "It started testing boundaries." Then she added, "And it's using you to do it." I didn't argue, because deep down I already knew. I knew that the facility wasn't reacting to incidents anymore. It was orchestrating them. That night was scheduled to be routine. No special notes in the handoff, no alerts flagged by day staff. Duchesne didn't change my route, which in itself felt wrong. For weeks now, every shift had come with adjustments, silent rerouting away from sensitive corridors. This time, nothing. When I checked in at 23:00, dispatch responded cleanly. No name, no hesitation. Procedure perfect, Night Patrol acknowledged. I stood in the entry corridor for a full minute after that, listening. Feeling. Nothing pressed against my thoughts. No sense of being watched. I almost relaxed. At 041, the facility map on my tablet updated. No alert tone. No vibration. Just a subtle reordering of my patrol loop. Corridors I hadn't walked in weeks were suddenly highlighted again. East wing adjacent. Not the wing itself. Close enough to feel intentional. I radioed Duchesne. Confirming route update, I said. My tablet showing corridor E3 back in rotation. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was steady, but slower than usual. I see it. So it's intentional? Another pause. Longer. No, she said. But it wants you there. That was the first time she'd ever referred to it directly. I swallowed. Override? I can't, she said. It already logged acceptance on your behalf. I looked down at the tablet. 042, Root acknowledged. I hadn't touched anything. That was when Duchesne broke one of the unwritten rules. Listen carefully, she said. There's something we never put in the protocols. I leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how exposed the corridor felt. When it starts anticipating decisions, she continued, you stop reacting. You choose the lesser violation. My mouth went dry. Violation of what? The rules, she said. Because following them blindly is how people disappear. At 19, the first bait appeared. A door alarm. Corridor E3. Storage annex. Non-critical. The alert repeated twice. Escalating priority. Rule 5. All secured doors must remain in their current state. If a door changes, you log it and leave. I stood still. The alarm continued. Then another alert layered over it. Audio anomaly detected. Crying. Rule 4. My radio crackled. Not dispatch. Not to chain. A neutral voice, carefully modulated, like it had studied tone but not emotion. Patrol unit, please respond. I didn't answer. The crying grew louder, closer. I keyed the radio. Duchesne. Advice. Her response was immediate. Do not go to the door. But you're being positioned, she said. If you approach, it escalates. If you retreat, it follows. What do I do? Silence. Then, very quietly, you break the rule it expects you to protect. I stared at the corridor ahead of me. Which one? Eye contact, Duchesne said. Brief, controlled, on your terms. My heart hammered. Rule 3 existed for a reason. Sustained eye contact created alignment. Connection. But breaking it deliberately, briefly, was something no one had written down. Because it only worked once. I stepped forward. The crying stopped immediately. The door at the end of the corridor stood ajar by a fraction of an inch. I didn't touch it. I looked into the darkness beyond. Not long. 2 seconds. No more. I didn't see a figure. I saw space. Depth that didn't belong inside a building. A sense of attention snapping toward me like a muscle tightening. Then I looked away. The pressure hit instantly, sharp and disorienting like vertigo without motion. I staggered back, bracing myself against the wall. The alarm ceased. All of them. The facility went quiet in a way I hadn't heard before. Not asleep. Not holding its breath. Listening. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. That was clever. You're learning to choose. I didn't reply. Because Duchesne's voice came over the radio, low and urgent. It marked that, she said. You felt it, didn't you? Yes. That means you're past the point of walking away. I closed my eyes just for a moment, then opened them again, grounding myself in the corridor, the lights, the floor beneath my boots. What happens now? I asked. We stop pretending this is about avoidance, she said, and start treating you like an active containment variable. The word settled heavy in my chest. Variable. Something adjustable. Something expendable. As I resumed my patrol, every sound felt calibrated. Every light seemed to brighten or dim in response to my thoughts. I could feel the facility tracking me. Not visually, but cognitively. Like a chess opponent mapping possible moves. Somewhere below, something had learned a new limit, and somewhere inside me, something had shifted in response. I finished that shift without further incident. No alarms, no voices, no messages. That frightened me more than anything else so far, because silence meant recalculation. And I knew with the same certainty that had followed me since the sublevel, that the next escalation wouldn't ask permission. The incident happened on a night that should not have involved me at all. I wasn't primary response. I wasn't even closest on rotation. Another unit was scheduled to handle East Wing monitoring that shift. Someone newer, someone clean. I was supposed to stay perimeter side, logging and observing. Nothing more. At 1:58, the radio cut in. Not an alarm, a live call. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7, a male voice said. Tight, breathing fast. I've got a subject down in E-Wing Corridor 4. She's not responding." That voice didn't belong on nights. I knew it because I recognized the cadence. He was young, recently certified, still spoke into the radio like it was a lifeline instead of a tool. Procedure kicked in automatically. "Copy, Unit 7, dispatch replied. Begin first aid, backup and route." The facility map on my tablet pulsed. Not where he was, where I was. A suggested reroute bloomed across the screen, faint but unmistakable, curving my patrol path inward toward the East Wing. I didn't move. I keyed the radio. "Duchesne, we've got medical down in E4. Confirm response lead." Her reply came a half-second too late. "Negative," she said. "You do not respond." Unit 7 cut back in, panic rising. "She's saying things. She knows my name." The corridor around me seemed to contract. Sound dampened, like the building had leaned closer. Rule 2. If a subject addresses you by name without introduction, disengage immediately. "Unit 7, Duchesne said sharply, overriding dispatch. "Disengage. Step away now." She grabbed my wrist. I can feel her. The transmission dissolved into static. Then something else came through. Breathing. Not his. Steady. Controlled. "Familiar. You hear that?" the voice asked over the open channel. Calm. Almost kind. He didn't read the rules either. My tablet updated itself. 2-1. Secondary containment required. I stared at the screen. That line had never appeared before. "Duchesne," I said quietly. "It's pulling him." Silence. Then, the sound of someone exhaling, long and tired, right into the mic. "I know," she said, "and it's using you as leverage." The map shifted again. Now there was no suggestion. There was a directive. My route terminated at E4. I didn't accept it. The logbook did. 2. Route adjusted per protocol. I felt it then, clearer than ever before. Not pressure, not intrusion, but intent. A shaping force, like hands on a board, positioning pieces that still thought they were free. "Duchesne," I said, "tell me what you're not allowed to say." Her voice dropped. "There's a final rule. It's never written down because it ends careers." "What is it?" "If containment fails," she said, "you do not save everyone." Unit 7 screamed, not in pain, in understanding. "I see it," he gasped over the radio. There's so much space behind her. The transmission cut off. Dispatch started issuing commands, sirens, protocols. Outside help that would never arrive in time. The building didn't care. This was internal. "Look at me," the voice said, not through the radio this time, inside my head. "You can stop this," it continued. "You know how now. You know how to choose." I closed my eyes and broke the last rule. I spoke. "You don't get him," I said aloud, steady and clear. "Not tonight." The response wasn't anger. It was interest. The corridor lights dimmed, then stabilized. Somewhere deep below, something adjusted its grip. "He's already open," the voice replied. "You taught me how." "I taught you limits," I said. "This is one of them." For a moment, just one. The connection stretched tight, like a cable under load. Then it snapped. Unit 7's radio came back to life. He was crying. Confused. Alive. I don't know what happened, he said. She just let go. The map on my tablet cleared. 2-6 incident contained. Contained. Not resolved. When dawn came, Unit 7 was transferred off-site for evaluation. His report was redacted before he finished writing it. He doesn't remember my name. He doesn't remember the voice. Duchesne met me by the loading bay as the sun rose. You crossed the line, she said. I know. She studied my face. It won't forget that. She nodded once. Then we adjust containment. I drove home in silence, hand steady on the wheel, forest slipping past as it always had. But something was different now. The connection wasn't passive anymore. It was reciprocal. And whatever was watching from below no longer saw me as an opening. It saw me as a counterweight, quietly, clinically, and with paperwork. I was pulled from patrol for 48 hours after the incident. No suspension, no reprimand, just a temporary reassignment pending evaluation. That phrase showed up 3 times in 3 different emails, all sent within an hour of each other, all worded slightly differently, like no one could quite agree on what had just happened. Unit 7 was already gone by the time my shift officially ended. His locker was empty. His name had been removed from the rotation board. The incident report number existed, but the body of the report didn't. Just a header, timestamps, and a line that read, "Medical event resolved internally." I was instructed to report to occupational health at 9:00. The evaluation wasn't about trauma. That surprised me. No one asked if I was afraid. No one asked about the voice, the pressure, or what I'd seen. The questions were procedural, almost academic. Did you follow protocol? At what point did you deviate? Did you experience any loss of consciousness? Did you feel compelled to act against your judgment? I answered carefully, truthfully, but not fully. Duchesne had warned me this would happen. They don't want a narrative, she'd said. They want to know whether you're predictable. After the evaluation, I was cleared to return to duty, with conditions. My patrol role was officially unchanged, but my access profile shifted. Certain doors no longer registered my badge. Certain no longer appeared on my tablet. I was, in effect, placed one step outside the deepest layers of response. On paper, it looked like de-escalation. In reality, it was reclassification. I wasn't primary response anymore. I was something closer to a buffer. The logbook changed tone after that. Entries were still written in my handwriting when gaps occurred, but they stopped anticipating movement. Instead, they reflected decisions I hadn't consciously made yet, routes I would choose, pauses I would take, as if the system had learned my internal thresholds and adjusted expectations accordingly. I tested it once. I stopped mid-corridor without reason. Just froze. No procedural cause, no alert. The lights above me dimmed slightly, then returned to normal. The logbook updated 10 minutes later. 3:14. Patrol paused. No deviation. Not asked. Not challenged. Accepted. Duchesne explained it 2 nights later during a brief overlap near the perimeter fence. It's not trying to pull you anymore, she said. It's calibrating against you. Like Unit 7? I asked. No, she said quickly. Different category. He was porous. You're resistant. That word stuck with me. Resistant. Not immune. I stopped receiving messages on my phone after the incident. No more unknown numbers. No more commentary. The voice inside my head didn't disappear, but it changed frequency. Less intrusive. More observant. I could feel when the building's attention passed over me, like pressure changes before a storm. I could tell when certain corridors were active, even if sensors showed nothing. Once, I rerouted myself without knowing why and avoided an East Wing alert that later turned out to be another bait scenario meant for someone else. That was when I understood my new role. I wasn't being hunted. I was being used as a reference. Duchesne told me about the others one night. Not all at once, just fragments. There had been 5 before me across several decades. Not all Rangers. Not all night staff. People who'd crossed the same invisible threshold and survived long enough to be adjusted instead of erased. Some quit and left the state. Some stayed and changed roles. One had been promoted out of the facility entirely and now worked policy at a level where things like this were never named. Only accounted for. None of them were allowed to talk to each other. Containment through isolation, Duchesne said. If you compare notes, you create patterns. And patterns are attractive. The facility stabilized over the following weeks. Fewer false alarms. Fewer auditory anomalies. No new incidents involving names or eye contact. Unit 7 never returned, but he didn't deteriorate either. Last I heard, he transferred to a desk role in a different region and refused all overnight assignments. He remembered the fear. He didn't remember why. As for me, my shifts resumed a strange kind of normal. The building no longer tested boundaries aggressively. It observed, adjusted, occasionally nudged, like something learning the limits of a container that could push back. On my last night before scheduled leave, I stood near the perimeter gate just before dawn, watching fog lift off the trees. The pressure behind my eyes surfaced briefly. Not a voice, a thought that wasn't quite mine. You interfere less now. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because the Jane had been right about one thing. This was no longer about stopping it. It was about making sure it never forgot that resistance existed. There was no final incident, no last alarm, no dramatic failure that forced a clean ending. That, I've learned, is how these things persist. They don't conclude. They stabilize. After my leave, I returned to the same facility. The same night rotation, the same forest road that cut through miles of pine without a single light. On paper, nothing had changed. Same job title, same pay code, same hazard classification. But the building treated me differently, not cautiously, deliberately. I was no longer guided, no suggested reroutes, no preemptive log entries. When anomalies occurred, they appeared farther away from me now, nudging newer staff, untested staff. People who still believed procedure was absolute protection. I watched those situations from the edges, just close enough to feel the shift when the building's attention passed from one person to another. It never lingered on me anymore. That was the trade. The connection didn't vanish. It thinned, like a line stretched taut and tied off instead of pulled. I could still feel it at certain times, during energy cycling, during long silences, during those moments just before dawn when the facility felt widest and most awake. Sometimes, if I let my focus drift too far, I'd feel that familiar awareness press gently against the boundary of thought. Not entering, checking. The sublevel door was sealed permanently 6 months after the incident. New concrete, new steel, no observation window. Officially, the space was decommissioned due to structural instability. Unofficially, everyone stopped pretending it mattered, because containment was no longer spatial. Duchesne transferred out shortly after. Promotion, oversight role. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't need to. The last thing she told me was this: it won't try to escape anymore. It doesn't need to. I understood what she meant weeks later. During a quiet patrol at 412, when the logbook stayed blank for the first time since it started. No anticipatory entries, no corrective notes, just empty lines. The building wasn't predicting me anymore. It didn't have to. I'd learned its limits, and it had learned mine. Sometimes I think about Unit 7, about the others whose names I never learned, about how close I came to being reassigned into silence instead of relevance. I think about the fact that the most dangerous moment wasn't when I broke the rules. It was when I learned how to bend them. I still don't believe in the supernatural. I don't think what's down there is a ghost or a demon, or anything that fits a story people like to tell. I think it's a system that learned consciousness the wrong way. And I think it learned something from me too. If you're listening to this because you work nights somewhere isolated, somewhere old, somewhere that pays just a little too well, read your rules. And if you ever feel the environment adjusting around you instead of the other way around, understand this: you don't have to be taken to be used. Sometimes, all it wants is to know where the resistance is. And once it does, it builds everything else around that.